According to a Reuters Ipsos poll on the 7th of November, that was pretty recently, Hillary Clinton had a 90% chance of winning the US elections. So why do polls and analysts get it so wrong? Is Donald Trump's election victory a classic sign of the age of disruption? The governments, corporates and other social institutions simply cannot take people for granted anymore. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and after the Brexit vote by the United Kingdom and then the American election surprise, we ask if there's any way in which we can predict the future, whether or not popular sentiment is going to rock markets, or whether or not we're so disconnected from the real world that we just cannot even begin to think that we can predict it. Joining me for analysis, Chris Gilmour, who's an investment analyst at Ipsos Stockbrokers. And on Skype from Los Angeles, we're joined by Anthony Ginsberg, who is managing director of GinsGlobal Index Funds. Anthony Ginsberg, let's start with you. Have you had any sleep in the last 48 hours or so since the big story broke?
Yes, Bruce, although it's a huge surprise to the pollsters, the average American is frankly pretty fed up, and throwing the stick of dynamite into the middle of Washington, D.C. did not come as such a huge surprise to many of the white working class members of the society. Frankly, they're fed up with some of the Obamacare and other policies. And I think the markets actually have surprised many folks. As you've seen, we've had quite a nice rally of 2 to 3% here in the US, and I believe in Europe again this morning it's up another 1%. So actually the markets have reacted quite favorably.
Now, throwing a stick of dynamite into Washington is one thing, but you've got basements in your houses in the United States. Taking a stick of dynamite into your own basement and setting it off there causes the house to collapse. Isn't there any concern at all that Donald Trump, if he follows through on the 30-odd election promises that he made, even some of them, that we could cause very, very severe economic and structural disruption, not only in the United States, but around the world?
Well, just very shortly, the good news is there's going to be an infrastructure boom in this country, which should actually, we're hoping, will really add 1% or more to GDP growth. The infrastructure plan he launched was for almost $650 billion of spend. As you know, the LA, New York, Miami airports all look like third world airports, frankly. I've also got friends since 2008 who've taken jobs with lower pay. So there's a lot of frustration. The infrastructure spend will also help with defense spending. So we're expecting a couple of 100,000 new jobs in defense. And frankly, some of these trade deals that are going to be renegotiated will also limit companies like Ford and others shipping jobs to Mexico and setting up factories down there. So you may actually see additional jobs being created in the US. So we're fairly optimistic that actually Mr. Trump will reduce his rhetoric. And as a businessman coming into Washington, hopefully he'll drain the swamp of wastage. And you may be surprised that the business community here is viewing the victory as fairly positive with some of the changes that may occur, particularly on the Obamacare. I just don't know if you're aware, the medical aid premiums in this country have almost doubled since the introduction of the nationalized health service, and that's caused a lot of problems for businesses.
So, I mean, well, I suppose in the first 100 days, Donald Trump will undo much of what Barack Obama has said about creating his legacy on. Anthony Ginsberg in the United States. Back with you in a moment, Anthony. Chris Gilmour, markets, South African markets, that initial reaction to the fact that Donald Trump had taken the presidency, the rand was down about 6% against the pound, 6.5% against the pound, softer against the euro, softer again against the dollar. But everything sort of seems to have equalized and balanced out, and it's like just another guy in a big house in the middle of Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Look, a couple of things to make mention of, Bruce. If you look historically at what has happened in the immediate aftermath of the US presidential election, you do get a bit of a sell-off. And I think what's happening is, as time has progressed and we've got the internet and we've got so much faster in terms of getting information around the world, that I think, yes, you saw that drop, but again, you know, the perception was, and then Anthony put it very, very well, that, you know, maybe this is actually not going to be not just not so bad, it actually could be very, very good. Here you've got a guy who's anti-establishment, he gets things done. He kicks people where it needs to be kicked and gets things moving. I think, you know, there's an awful lot of bottlenecking in the American economy. Now, if you can get rid of that and get some movement there, I think the problem is that he's been so incredibly obnoxious and he has offended so many people that you know it's difficult to warm to the fellow.
No, but it's so Anthony Ginsberg. I mean, he has caused a great deal of disruption. Anybody with moderate sensibilities is going to have found something to be offended by from out of what's been coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. However, he makes his victory speech, and it's not rah-rah from the rooftops. It's, well done, Hillary, you put on a great battle. We're going to build this country together. Not quite Obama-esque in his rhetoric. He was tired. It was very, very late early in the morning, late at night in the United States. Does his tone change as President Trump from candidate Trump?
I believe so. I have to say, to pick up on Chris's point, the gridlock in Washington the last decade has been awful. This is going to be the first time that the Republicans control all three houses of government, the Senate, which is the upper house, the House of Representatives, the lower house, and the White House. So actually, the era of gridlock could be, frankly, over. He's in a very powerful position with all three houses. So that's where the positive spin comes through. It was actually surprising because the Senate was actually up for grabs. Many thought the Democrats may win that. And just frankly, Hillary Clinton was really a status quo candidate. She didn't really offer much vision beyond a third term of Obamanomics, if you like. So I think many people want change. There's a desperate desire for better jobs and for certainty on the economy. And frankly, taxes are going to come down in this country, both on the corporate and the personal level. And there's a level of positiveness, certainly amongst the business community.
Just a bit of trivia. When last were the Republicans in control of all three houses?
Almost 70 odd years ago. So this is fairly historic, actually. And that's why the cognoscenti believe that the gridlock should be unlocked now. We've actually got a wonderful opportunity to get things through, to actually reform Obamacare. We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater completely, but there's a lot of opportunity to get the infrastructure built through. In fact, the Democrats, I believe, will be supportive because that's going to create many, many jobs. Our infrastructure in this country, roads, airports, bridges are crumbling. We even had a bridge some years ago collapse outside of Chicago. So there's a desperate desire. Frankly, also the white working class has been ignored for many, many years. And there was a huge wave of support for Trump amongst that community, which had been undetected, frankly, by the pollsters.
Now, Anthony Ginsberg says 70-odd years ago when the Republicans were in charge of all three houses. It's a bit longer than that, actually. It was 1927, 1928. What happened after that?
Great Depression.
Yes. Now, can we link it directly to the fact that the Republicans were in charge of all three houses, of course, of power in the United States? But as Anthony says, big expenditure plans and big plans to cut taxes because that's what Republicans like to do. America's sitting on a debt pile of $20 trillion, courtesy of Fed bailouts of the U.S. economy. Can America really afford what Anthony Ginsberg is hoping Trump will deliver?
You see, I suppose many economists, Bruce, would say, well, if you're spending it on infrastructure, that's good deficit spending. So, I mean, to put the figures that you've just quoted into context, that's about 120% of GDP. It's massive. Okay, it's not the highest in the world. Japan's a bit higher, maybe Greece is a bit higher.
And they're not doing great either.
Yeah, well, precisely. So, therefore, you can't use them as role models. But if you were to get the kind of spend, excuse me, that Anthony's talking about, $650 billion US, that is huge. Yeah. That is absolutely massive. And that will create an awful lot of jobs. And I suppose to a certain extent, you can justify it. And I suppose also, if you are the printer of the world's monetary standard, the dollar, you can probably get away with it as well just by kicking the can down the road further and further and pushing out the deficit. But at some point in time, there has to be a day of reckoning. Cutting taxes and increasing government expenditure, does result in your debt to GDP figure ballooning even further.
What is the consequence of that then, Anthony Ginsberg? I mean, it all sounds good and it's good political rhetoric, but there is a real economic consequence 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Well, fair enough. And I have to say, when Ronald Reagan took over from Carter back in 1980, there was a lot of skepticism about cutting taxes. He put through a huge tax cut bill. What's happening in this country at the moment is there's tremendous unfairness for the middle class. Warren Buffett's secretary, for instance, Bruce, you know this, pays double the tax rate that Mr. Buffett pays. So there's a huge unfairness in our tax system, amongst other things. People paying close to 40% in taxes when the hedge fund managers, private equity, Mr. Buffett himself are paying less than 20%. So there really is a movement to reduce taxes for the middle class and to free up expenditure. So I'm hoping that we'll actually see a renaissance along the lines of what happened with Ronald Reagan. Now, there is skepticism about trickle-down economics, I understand that. But we have to reform the tax system. The nationalized health system is not working here. And we're hoping that the defense spending that's going to be a huge issue as well, plus the infrastructure spend, certainly in the next 2 years, we're expecting GDP to add at least 1%, or possibly 1.5%.
Anthony Ginsberg, Managing Director at GinsGlobal in index funds. I'm going to let you go. I'm hearing the characteristic blip coming through on the Skype line. Chris Gilmour, let me wrap up with you then. As we look ahead, I was chatting to one of the guys at Investec the other day and says, America's due for a recession. No matter who becomes the next president of the United States, with all of the expenditure plans, with all of the stuff, actually cyclically, America's due for a recession.
Yeah. Bruce, you're quite right. Here we are, we're late in the economic cycle. This turnaround started in March '09, I think it was. So here we are, 7 years into it. We are approaching recession. And most economists out there would probably agree that 2018 is what we're looking at. Now, that can be delayed if you start pumping in an awful lot more money.
If you get the stimulus coming through.
Precisely. And bear in mind that if you get the kind of growth that we're talking about here, in terms of your denominator, the GDP side of things, also don't forget that the US is one of the few developed countries in the world that's got a growing population. Mm-hmm. I've forgotten the name of this organization. They reckon by the year 2050, the US will be the 4th largest country in the world in terms of population. You'll have India, China, Nigeria, which you can fit into the size of Texas, and then the US on 400 million people. So don't forget that if you have a growing population and you can get growth of 3-4% over that period of time, then your debt to GDP actually doesn't look so bad.
Okay.
So that's critical.
Absolutely right. But it all, again, depends on just how vociferous Donald Trump is in following through on the political rhetoric. It seems unlikely. He's going to have some real work to do. Building walls to keep Mexicans out and stuff is the stuff of the pipe dreams of some of his voters, perhaps the Ku Klux Klan guys who are claiming credit for putting him in the White House, which is scary.
Yeah. Look, some of these things are just not going to happen. First of all, you're not going to get the wall, and secondly, even if you did, the Mexicans ain't going to pay for it. So that's not going to happen. I don't think you can practically prohibit Muslim immigration into the country. You know, it's pretty indefensible. But I think you can start checking up and moving a lot of undocumented refugees out of the country, which is one of the things he talked about. So certainly, part of his rhetoric will be carried out. And as Anthony was saying, I think moving that gridlock, even if he manages to get a portion of that done, I think will be good. But you know, he's such a loose cannon, and that is the scary part of all of this. You notice I'm doing a bit of a Trump hand movement here, as I think what worries people. But at the end of the day, don't forget that the US president's powers are limited by the major checks and balances within the American political system.
And said with conviction.
Yes.
Said with conviction and seriousness. Chris Gilmour, investment analyst at Barclays Wealth and Investment Management at Ipsos Stockbrokers. Then also, of course, we had Anthony Ginsberg from GinsGlobal in California. There'll be other polls, elections, shock and shakes throughout the system. Until next time, though, have yourself a very good evening. Good night.